you guys?
I'm the noisemakers. We're okay with swords.
Christine is really a special child. She and I had a 30-minute talk this past week about seeing a wasp at school. Well, really, she had a 30-minute talk. I had a 30-minute listen. And really, here's the truth. In life, some of us are like hoverflies. They look scary and intimidating, but they have no stinger, no ability to hurt you. I'm one of those people. I understand that I have one of those faces. Some of you know what I mean. And I at times appear angry, and I'm not. That's just the way I look. Some people are like honeybees. They're very easygoing, won't bother you at all unless you threaten their home, and then both of you are going to die. And then some people are like wasps, which are essentially little winged Satans. They will sting you for any reason at any time just for looking at them.
Or no reason at all.
No reason at all. Now, sometimes I was going over, my notes with Sarah the other night, and she angrily demanded to know which one of these she fit into. She has literally hit me before and said, "I'm not violent." Now, because we're going to talk about anger today, and when we think of somebody with an anger problem, we're all thinking of somebody maybe we know, or if you don't know anybody, it's probably you, who is a wasp. Those with uncontrollable outbursts, and those who will yell and cuss at people or physically assault them. And I need you to understand, before we get into this, that Jesus is not talking about those people in what we're about to read. If you have your Bibles or your apps, you can open with me. We are continuing here in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5. Verse 21, Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said to those of old, 'You shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says, 'You fool,' will be liable to the hell of fire. So if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge and the judge to the guard, and you be put into prison. Truly I say to you, you will never get out until you've paid the last penny." So here as we start in, I messed up on the verse again. But this is Matthew chapter 5, verse 21 and 22. So Jesus starts out here saying, "You have heard that it was said to those of old, 'You shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says, 'You fool,' will be liable to the hell of fire." Do not miss the importance of what he says here. He says, "You have heard that it was said." So he says, you remember the 10 Commandments given to Moses, but I say. Imagine if you heard one of your kids tell one of your other children, "You heard mom tell you this, but I'm telling you." How would you react? You don't get to do that. Because what they're doing is claiming an authority that is at least equal to your own. You don't get to modify what I'm saying. And yet Jesus here does that. He says, "You know the 10 Commandments given by Moses, the 6th one? But I say, do this." Jesus places his authority here right off the bat, at least equal to Moses. And even then, Moses was just delivering messages given to him by God. Jesus was saying, "I am telling you, not I'm passing along to you a message given me by someone else." So he takes the 6th commandment, "You shall not murder." And then he sets up this series of 3 parallel statements. And there's this kind of repetition there. And he says, you know how people are judged in court for murder? the same will happen to those of you who speak in your anger. So you have the threefold development of consequences: liable to judgment, liable to the council, and liable to the hell of fire. You have the same kind of threefold statement: everyone who's angry with his brother, everyone who insults his brother, and everyone who says, "You fool." Now, these references to human courts end up, though, with a judgment by God. Now, it's important to understand, as we begin here and in other sins he's going to reference, is that anger and murder are sins of the same type, but they are carried out to a different extent. So, being angry with someone is not as bad as murdering them, but it is a sin of the same kind. Where does murder begin? You don't just wake up and kill someone. First, they leave their dirty socks laying around for the 1,000th time. And what are they always looking for in crime drama shows? They're looking for somebody with a motive. They're assuming that this murder didn't just take place, that somebody had a deep and abiding hatred or anger that had its outburst here in this act of violence. Hatred carried out to its fullest extent ends in murder. Jesus here addresses the root of murder, which is anger. Now, what I find fascinating about this is when it comes to the end there, whoever says, "You fool," will be liable to the hell of fire. Everybody wants this not to apply to us, right? And so some people will go and say, well, maybe, that word, it refers to like a curse word or something like, so if it's somebody cussing somebody out. And I remember when I first read through it, I wanted to look at it that way because that for me would be manageable. I can avoid cussing somebody out in a way that, okay, it's not going to apply to me. And then sometimes we think that, okay, if I can just control my words and not tell somebody and speak in anger, but chew them to shreds in my mind all day long, that I'm not violating what Jesus is talking about. Am I any more righteous for not telling somebody and vocalizing the anger that I feel in my heart towards them? And see, what we're trying to do is reclassify these statements of Jesus in a way that doesn't apply to every single one of us frequently. Some of us this morning, trying to get your kids out the door. Didn't know you'd come in and discover you were a murderer. And yet that's exactly what the crowd is thinking at this point. They're saying, surely, Jesus, you're not saying that I'm a murderer. I keep the sixth commandment by not killing people. Though some of them really deserve it. And yet the thrust, you can't miss this, the thrust of what Jesus is saying here to the people listening who think they are observant keepers of the law, he's telling them directly, you are a murderer. You violate the sixth commandment in your anger, even if you've never killed someone. You fall short. To which their response was, well, that's impossible. Do you know who I'm married to? In a metaphorical sense. I'm not saying that.
You are in trouble.
We say, no, I'm angry at people all the time. It's impossible to go through life unless you're going to go live in a mountain somewhere. Of course you're going to be angry at people. Of course you're going to speak words in anger. Who could ever live up to this standard? Jesus did. Remember that the pattern here in the Sermon on the Mount is he begins by illustrating for the people he's talking to, you do not live up to God's requirements. And then the promise of the gospel is that Jesus did live out physically the righteous requirements of the law. And yet here when it comes to anger, Jesus living out the righteous requirements of the law is not really in the way that you think. There's an overwhelming tendency of artists, especially European artists, to portray Jesus as like this kind of wimpy figure. he was a carpenter, physical labor all day long. So he wasn't going to be a very slender figure. But John records what happens as Jesus enters the temple in Jerusalem at Passover. In the temple, he found those who were selling oxen and sheep and pigeons and the money changers sitting there. And making a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and oxen. And he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And he told those who sold the pigeons, "Take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of trade." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." Now, as you hear that, let me ask you, was Jesus doing this politely? Was he laughing as he did this? I mean, he might have been chuckling to himself as he made the whip. And the disciples, "Gee, Jesus, what are you doing with that? This is another one of your really cool object lessons? Oh man, he is assaulting the money changers. Wow." There is anger here. It is a righteous anger. The biblical word for this is wrath, which is the settled opposition of a holy God against sin in all of its forms. You cannot read the Bible without encountering this. And here, what provokes Jesus is the fact that they had turned what was meant to be a sacred and holy place into an opportunity to earn money. And so he drives them out. Now, the truth is, we get angry all the time at stuff that we shouldn't. We have anger, but it is not typically a righteous anger. When your spouse's snoring annoys you, it is not because it is an offense against God. Maybe for some of us, it's to that extent. It angers us and it frustrates us because it has to do with me, not God. Any of you have something that angers you exceedingly and yet it shouldn't? For me, it's typos. I was sitting at the General Assembly, and this guy was giving a presentation. He showed a brief video, and I'm the kind of person who notices this stuff. In the background, it had a song, and just very faintly in the song, it's called an audible watermark because they used it off of some public use site, and it said like Audio Guard, and just really quietly in the background, and it said it 3 or 4 times, and I just felt an irrational response to it. And I had to go up to him afterwards and say, "Hey, just so you know, first video you showed, explain the issue to him." But we get angry all the time at stupid, petty stuff. Fortunately, Jesus was perfect in this area. Because if he had taken offense to things the way we take offense to things, what do you think would have happened at the crucifixion? In fact, First Peter in his letter to the church, he reminds them of the example that Jesus sets. He said, he committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth. So he was totally innocent. When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly. And so Jesus, as people are spitting on him, as they are mocking him, as everything is directed at him personally in a way that he did not deserve, what would have happened here if Jesus was anything less than perfect? The entire world would have been consumed in anger. Instead, Jesus on the cross says, "Forgive them, they don't know what they're doing." And then he goes afterwards and pursues the very same people that chanted for his death to welcome them into his family. Now, hear me though, there are times that anger is the appropriate response. Here's what Paul writes to the Ephesians, describing how their new life in Christ is marked by a change from their old patterns. Ephesians 4:26 and 27, he says, "Be angry." So you're like, I got that part down. I'm good so far. "Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger and give no opportunity to the devil. Now, he's not saying here, again, this is so important, he's not saying never be angry. It would be impossible. He says, in your anger, when you are angry, it is going to be a given. Do not sin. See, sometimes anger actually motivates us to change. Consider the response of the faithful Christians who fought against the slave trade for years and years. It was impossible for them to look at a shipload of human beings gathered to be sold as property and not feel anger. It was a righteous anger, and it motivated them to the years of persistence that it took to end the practice. And even in our human anger, somebody offends me or does something that upsets me, it presents me with a choice. What will I do with it? I'm very aware of this anytime a pastor hits himself with a hammer. Everybody watches. I felt it. Stubbed my toe on something, dropped something on my foot. And everybody's going to look at, what's he going to do? What is he going to say? Liberty gibbets. Truth is, someday some bully is going to break my daughter's heart. And I will feel anger. I am a very easygoing guy. But I can just tell you already that I will feel anger abundantly at some point with that. And again, this isn't Stoicism. The Stoics viewed their duty in life to go through everything without emotional responses whatsoever, and that is not Christianity. And so my job in that moment, in my anger, will be to be angry and not sin. I will be answering to God what I do with that anger. So the first thing Paul says is to deal with it quickly. Don't let the sun go down on your anger. Listen, if you want a long-lasting and happy marriage, consistently people who deal with their issues quickly. I know some couples actually have it as a specific rule, like we will not go to bed until we have resolved whatever issue it is that we're dealing with. He says, because if you don't do that, if you don't deal with your anger quickly, if you don't bring it to resolution, the result of that is giving an opportunity or a foothold to the devil in your heart. I've illustrated this with students before, and I had some of these boys, come on, do you think you can pick this chair up? Sure. And had them hold the chair up in front of them like this. And he said, no, just hold it there. First, everything is fine. And as they continue to hold it out there in front of them, the weight of the chair does not change. And yet, it feels as more and more of an oppressive burden until everything is on fire in their body. Don't hold on to your anger. Anger must move through to resolution because, again, we have all seen the warping effects of unchecked, unresolved anger. It corrupts into bitterness. So Jesus goes on to say, so if you're offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. Now I want you to notice, and this is just really important, the kind of situation here. We typically pursue peace when it bothers us. If I feel angry at someone, that is a feeling I am uncomfortable with, and so I am more motivated to pursue it. If I really don't care about it and somebody else is mad at me, we're much more likely to write that off. That's their problem. I don't feel uncomfortable. And yet here Jesus says, if somebody has something against you, if there is a relationship that is broken in any way, now we'll get back to this application in a second, but here he continues the imagery of the court. He says, come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge and the judge to the guard and you be put in prison. Truly I say to you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. Now, if you ever watch TV shows that have like lawyers and courts, there's often this moment before people enter the courtroom or before, they get there where they have an opportunity to settle the lawsuit out of court. Where both sides can come to an agreement now and say, if we settle this now, that's fine. But once we enter that courtroom, we are surrendering ourselves to whatever ruling the judge gives. Once that ruling is given, it is final. And so Jesus is saying, you need an out-of-court settlement with everybody in your life. Because who is the judge? It is God Almighty. Now, some of you might be thinking, as happens in those shows, well, I got a really good case. You see, this person, they were tremendously unfair to me. And so, let's go to the judge. Now, I don't know about you, but my parents were like the Supreme Court in our household. And there was an understanding that if we could not resolve things between us siblings and we took it to them, typically they would attempt to make it so that none of us was happy with the outcome. And here's what you have to understand, that if you take somebody before God, if you're literally of the mindset of, I'm going to hold on to this thing until death, and I'm going to cry out because they wronged me, and you're going to go to God and demand, God, you need to bring justice. Do you understand what that means for you? For God to bring what is just to you? See, what we really want is mercy for us and justice for others. Jesus says you can't do that. You got to understand, if you're going to come before God one day and you're going to say, no, I gave nobody anything they didn't deserve, what's going to happen? You'll be handed over and justice will be done to you. Jesus says, don't wait. Don't wait until that point. He says, you need to make a settlement now while you have time. We don't know how long we have left to make things right with people. I've shared with you guys how I put off making things right with my mother until she was on the verge of death. But we don't know when we will stand before the judge. And so Jesus pairs this with a physical act. Now he's speaking to largely faithful Jews here. Kind of assumes that they are regularly giving money. And he says, this is important enough to make you stop. If you suddenly remember things aren't right between you and somebody else. And he says, if you're going to give anything to God, you need to begin by making peace. Now, I want us to take seriously what Jesus is saying. And I want you to consider who is there today that has something against you. Who is there in your life that things aren't right with? Because I've come to understand this about this culture here, that people around here do not often aggressively confront people that they're angry with. What do y'all do? You bless their hearts. Right? You shut off your heart to them. You smile at them in public, and you hold on to the hurt. That is not peace. That is not reconciliation. Jesus says, go to them. Not wait for them to come to you. Not sit there and remember, oh yeah, that person really needs to get over that. Go to them, pursue a settlement, not justice. Again, God's going to give justice. You've got two choices, either the justice of God or the mercy of God. So it's first go and be reconciled to them, and then come. So if I went and interviewed people in your life, if I were to go in your social circle, in your family circle, your neighbors, and if I were to ask them, what is the status of your relationship with that person? Where would there be pain? Where would there be awkward conversations? What would there be broken that needs healing? And so again, I want to do, because I love this physical act that Jesus prescribes. And I want to take it quite literally here this morning. And so we are not passing the plates this morning as we collect offering. Instead, I've placed the plates here up front, and I want you to bring what you have forward to the plates. But before you do that, I want you to do what Jesus commands us to do in a very literal sense. I want you to consider who has anything against you. Now, you may, at this point, take out your phone and text them. If they're here in the congregation and you need to go and talk to them before you bring whatever it is forward, do that. Or if they're not here, decide right now that as a matter of first priority, you will pursue peace with them. And whatever that means to make it right. I want you to do that before you bring what you have to offer. Because I can promise you this, God is glorified more in the first act than in the second. So as the worship team comes forward, let's pray and do that this morning. God, I pray that you would forgive us for the times that we've been so slow to move towards people when it's painful. God, that we so often allow our anger and bitterness and unresolved feelings to create a sense of distance between us and others. We are so thankful that you have not done the same with us. That though in your holiness, your attitude towards sin is wrath, yet you come to us in love and mercy. So even as we understand how woefully short we fall, we come to you asking for your mercy, thankful that you have lived this out and that in your perfection we find hope. And I pray that in every way you would make us to be a community that lives this out. In Jesus' name, amen. So again, as the worship team plays, I want you to pray where you are.